Look at your right wrist right now. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Actually look at it. You see the skin. You see the tendons pressing faintly against the surface. And if the light is right, you see the veins. Blue-green lines branching in a pattern that belongs to no one else alive. That pattern on your wrist is yours alone. It has never existed before you, and it will never exist again after you. Not in the same arrangement, not in the same depth, not in the same branching sequence. Most people look at that and see biology, vessels carrying blood, plumbing. The Corpus Hermeticum, one of the most ancient and most suppressed collections of spiritual knowledge in the Western world, looked at the same mark and called it something else entirely. It called it the seal of the returning soul. And before you dismiss that as mystical decoration, as the kind of phrase that belongs on a motivational poster or a fantasy novel, I need you to stay with me, because what the Hermetic tradition was describing, what the text called the sphragis, the seal, the imprint left on the material body by the descending pneuma, maps with an almost uncomfortable precision onto what you have been experiencing your entire life without having language for it. The exhaustion that has no medical cause, the sense that you are watching your own life from slightly outside it, the moments where a piece of ancient writing, a piece of music, a specific quality of light at dusk makes something in your chest vibrate like a string that was already stretched before you arrived here. The knowledge, not belief, knowledge, that this world, exactly as it is presented to you, is not the complete story. The Corpus Hermeticum does not begin with the wrist, it begins with the voice. In the first tractate, the one known as Poimandres, the narrator, the student, the pneumatic one, the one who has not yet remembered what he is sitting alone when a presence appears. The text says, "A being of vast and boundless magnitude seemed to call my name and said to me, 'What dost thou wish to hear and behold, and what dost thou wish to learn and know?' The student answers, 'I wish to learn the things that are, and comprehend their nature, and know God.' And then something happens that every translation struggles to contain. The being, which the text later identifies as Poimandres, the shepherd of men, an emanation of the highest nous, the supreme mind, does not answer with words. It dissolves into light, and in the light, the student sees. He sees the descent. He sees how the soul, the pneuma, came down through the spheres and acquired, at each level, a coating, a layer, a seal, not metaphorically, mechanically. This is the structure the Corpus Hermeticum describes with what can only be called technical precision for a document written somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era in Alexandria, in the philosophical and spiritual laboratory that was Hellenistic Egypt, that place where Platonic philosophy, Egyptian temple mystery, Jewish mysticism, and the earliest strands of Gnostic Christianity were being pressed together like layers of sediment into a stone that would hold for 2,000 years. The Hermetic cosmology works like this. At the highest level is the pleroma, the fullness, the source, the unbounded light. From the pleroma emanates nous, the divine mind. From nous emanates logos, the word. And from the interplay of these primordial principles, the world of matter is eventually produced, not by the highest god, but by the demiurge, the craftsman god, the lesser deity who constructs the material realm. The demiurge is not evil in the Hermetic system. He is simply limited. He builds from what he can perceive, and what he cannot perceive is the pneuma, the divine spark that the pleroma secretly conceals within the material body at the moment of physical birth. But to get here, to arrive in this body, in this life, on this earth, the pneuma had to travel. It descended through 7 planetary spheres, and at each sphere, it acquired something. From the sphere of Saturn, the capacity for delay, for heaviness, for the slowing of time. From the sphere of Jupiter, the impulse toward authority, toward judgment, toward the making of structures. From the sphere of Mars, the force of aggression and the capacity for forward motion. From the sphere of the Sun, the ability to be seen, to emanate, to occupy space in the world. From the sphere of Venus, the pull toward beauty, toward connection, toward the ache that we call desire. From the sphere of Mercury, the faculty of reason, of language, of translation between realms. From the sphere of the moon, the final coating, the layer of physical sensation, of breath, of the body's animal rhythms. 7 coatings, 7 seals. And the pneuma arrived wrapped in all of them, pressed into a body, set into time, and this is the critical point, the point that the Corpus Hermeticum returns to again and again, caused to forget. The forgetting is not a punishment. It is a condition of the descent. The soul that arrives in matter arrives fully sealed. Its origin is hidden from it. Its memory of the pleroma is covered by the 7 layers it accumulated on the way down. And so it lives, as most souls live, believing the coating is the self, believing that the anger is who it is, that the desire is who it is, that the body, the name, the biography are the complete story. But some pneumata, and the Corpus Hermeticum is explicit about this, not ambiguous, some pneumatic beings carry their seal differently. They wear the 7 coatings, yes. They live in time, yes. But something in them resists the complete closing. Something in them keeps an aperture open, a gap through which at intervals the original light bleeds through. The text calls these beings Gnostikoi, the ones who know, or more precisely, the ones who are in the process of remembering. If you have reached this video, if this title caused something in you to pause and look at your own wrist, you already know which category you are in. Take your index finger of your left hand and press it gently against the inside of your right wrist. Feel the pulse, that rhythm, a frequency the ancient Egyptians understood as the drumming of Ptah, the Vedic texts as the rhythm of Brahman, and the Hermetic tradition as the echo of the original vibration of the nous. That pulse is both the most material thing about you and the place where, according to the Corpus Hermeticum, the seal of your descent is most directly readable. The sphragis. In ancient Greek, sphragis means seal in the most concrete physical sense, the wax impression left by a signet ring, the mark that authenticates a document and proves origin. In the 1st century world, a sphragis was not decoration. It was identity. It was proof of belonging. Hermetic theology borrowed this word with full awareness of its weight. The pneumatic soul carries a sphragis, a seal pressed into it by the nous at the moment of emanation, not visible to the material eye, not written in letters anyone can read, but encoded in the specific pattern of sensitivities, the specific frequency of resonances, the specific ache that the pneumatic person carries through every material experience. The Asclepius, one of the later Hermetic tractates preserved in the Nag Hammadi library, that extraordinary collection of Gnostic texts sealed into a clay jar and buried in the Egyptian desert near Nag Hammadi sometime in the 4th century, rediscovered by accident in 1946 by a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman who was digging for fertilizer. The Asclepius states the principle with unusual directness. God has inscribed his seal upon the human being. The human being who does not know this seal will never find the way back. The way back. That phrase, the return, the ascent, the anabasis, is the central motion of Hermetic theology. What descended must eventually ascend. The soul that came down through the 7 spheres will, if it completes its work in matter, ascend back through them. And at each sphere on the way up, it will shed the coating that sphere gave it. It will return, layer by layer, to the original pneuma, to the undressed divine spark, to the pleroma. But here is what the Corpus Hermeticum says that almost no contemporary discussion of Hermeticism includes, because it is the part that is most difficult to hold in the mind without it changing how you see everything. The souls that are capable of ascending are not all souls. The Hermetic texts, and this is mirrored in the Nag Hammadi texts, in the Valentinian Gnostic schema, in the Gospel of Philip, in the Tripartite Tractate, divide humanity into three categories. The Helics, those who are entirely identified with matter, who will dissolve back into it at death with no further continuation. The Psychics, those who have a soul but not a pneuma, who can achieve a kind of afterlife within the lower realms but cannot ascend to the pleroma. And the Pneumatics, those who carry the divine spark, the sphragis, the seal of origin, and who are therefore not finally at home here. This is not an elitism the Hermetic tradition invented casually. It is an attempt to describe an observable phenomenon, the phenomenon of people who, no matter how materially comfortable their lives become, no matter how much success they accumulate by the world's metrics, carry a specific and irreducible knowledge that something essential is missing. Not missing from their circumstances, missing from the world itself. If you have ever tried to explain this to someone who does not experience it, you know how the conversation ends. They look at you with concern. They suggest therapy, medication, gratitude practices. They hear depression where you are describing perception. They hear dissatisfaction where you are describing metaphysical homesickness. The Corpus Hermeticum has a word for the experience they cannot hear. It calls it xenia. Strangeness, the condition of being a guest in a place that was not built for you, not as a mood, as a structural condition. The awareness that the rules by which this world operates, acquisition, status, biological reproduction, tribal belonging, do not entirely apply to you, even when you follow them successfully. Now I want to tell you about something that happened in a library in Florence in 1463. A man named Cosimo de' Medici, the most powerful banker in Europe, the unofficial ruler of Florence, the man who had spent decades collecting the most valuable manuscripts in the Western world, was dying. He had for years been funding a massive project, the translation of the complete works of Plato into Latin. He had assigned this project to a young scholar named Marsilio Ficino, and then something arrived that caused Cosimo to change his instructions. A monk returned from Macedonia with a manuscript, a single manuscript, handwritten in Greek, old in a way that made scholars nervous, dense with a theology that seemed to predate everything. It was a collection of tractates attributed to someone called Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice greatest, a figure who the Renaissance believed to be a contemporary of Moses, perhaps older, a master of both Egyptian and Greek wisdom who had recorded the deepest secrets of the nature of the soul and the cosmos. Cosimo looked at the manuscript and gave Ficino a new instruction. Translate this first, before Plato, before anything. Translate this before I die. Ficino translated the Corpus Hermeticum in a matter of weeks, and when Cosimo de' Medici read the completed translation in 1463, a few months before his death, he reportedly said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "This is what I have been searching for." The translation spread through European intellectual life with a speed that startled everyone. Pico della Mirandola read it. Giordano Bruno built an entire cosmological system from its foundations, a system that would, in 1600, get him burned alive in Rome. Paracelsus reorganized medicine around its principles. John Dee built his Enochian language from its account of the descent and ascent of the pneuma. The Corpus Hermeticum, when it arrived in Renaissance Europe, did not feel like a historical curiosity. It felt like a letter that had been in transit for 1500 years and had finally arrived. And the question Ficino could not stop returning to, the question that appears in letter after letter he wrote to colleagues across Italy and France and Germany, was this: how do you know if you carry the sphragis? How do you know if you are pneumatic? His answer, developed across decades of commentary and correspondence, was what he called the signa pneumatica, the signs of the pneumatic nature. And they are not what you might expect. They are not signs of virtue, not signs of spiritual achievement, not signs of moral excellence. They are signs of a particular kind of suffering, a particular relationship with the material world. The first sign: the pneumatic person experiences the world at a register of intensity that does not match the social situation. Music that breaks you open when others nod pleasantly. Art that causes physical pain in the chest. The Hermetic tradition interpreted this not as sensitivity in the psychological sense, but as resonance. the pneuma responding to echoes of its origin frequency in the material world. The second sign, a relationship with time that is structurally different from the norm. Days blur, but specific moments crystallize into permanence. Ficino called this tempus pneumaticum, the experience of a consciousness that is partially outside the temporal structure that the material world imposes. The third sign, an inability to fully commit to any single identity or group affiliation without the residual awareness that the affiliation is provisional. The pneumatic person can belong to things, family, community, profession, but always with a part of the awareness standing slightly to the side, watching, knowing the belonging is real but not final. The fourth sign, recurring dreams of landscapes and architectures that do not correspond to any geography the waking self has encountered. The Hermetic tradition interpreted these as the pneuma's partial memory of the spheres it passed through during the descent. The fifth sign, the pull of this knowledge itself. The fact that you are here. The fact that when you encounter the word pneuma or Corpus Hermeticum or sphragis, something in you does not learn it. Something in you recognizes it, as if it knew before you did. Before we go further, I want to tell you about something specific that is available to you right now. A resource that takes everything we are discussing in this video and gives it practical structure. It is called the Pneumatic Code. It is a guide I have put together for precisely the person who is watching this, the person who has been carrying this awareness without a map. It covers the complete architecture of the Hermetic descent and ascent, the specific practices the tradition prescribed for the pneumatic person who is ready to begin the work of remembering, and the framework for recognizing the sphragis in your daily experience rather than only in extraordinary moments. The link is in the first pinned comment below this video. It is only available while this video is running. When it ends, the link closes. If this is landing for you, click it now and download your copy. Now let us go back to the Corpus Hermeticum, because the text does something in its second half that most modern discussions skip over, and it is the part that makes the wrist make sense. Tractate 11, known as Mind to Hermes, contains a passage the Cambridge historian Garth Fowden called the most precise description of the pneumatic experience in all of late antique literature. It attempts not allegory, but direct description. The passage says, "Leap clear of all that is corporeal, and make yourself grow to a like expanse with that greatness which is beyond all measure. Rise above all time and become eternity." But the passage continues. Think that you are everywhere at once, on land, at sea, in heaven. Think that you are not yet begotten, that you are in the womb, that you are young, that you are old, that you have died, that you are in the world beyond the grave. This is not instruction, this is description. The Corpus Hermeticum attempting to describe what the pneumatic consciousness already experiences when it is not suppressing itself to fit the expectations of the material world. The pneuma knows that it is everywhere at once. The pneuma knows that the categories of young and old, living and dead, here and elsewhere, are the coatings of the seven spheres, not the truth of what it is. The pneuma knows that the wrist it looks at is one instance of a pattern that extends beyond the single lifetime in which the pattern is currently operating. The seal of the returning soul. The sphragis is not the mark that says, "You have been chosen above others, you are superior, you deserve more." The pneumatic tradition was never about that, even though it has often been distorted into that reading. The sphragis is the mark that says, "You have returned. You have been here before. You are here again, in a different coating, in a different century, carrying the same essential frequency. And you are capable, if you do the work, of ascending rather than simply cycling again." The Hermetic tradition used the word palingenesia, birth again, for this. But in the Hermetic context, it does not mean the kind of reincarnation Eastern traditions discuss. It means the ascent, the return, through conscious stripping of the seven coatings, to the original pneuma. And the mechanism of that return is recognition, not practice in the ordinary sense, not ritual, Recognition. The Corpus Hermeticum, Tractate 4, known as the Mixing Bowl, states, God filled a great mixing bowl with nous and sent it down, and bade the herald proclaim to the hearts of men, baptize yourself with this bowl's baptism, you that are able, you that know for what purpose you were made. You that know, not you that have been taught, not you that have performed the correct rituals. You that know. The criterion for the pneumatic ascent is gnosis, direct, unmediated recognition of the soul's origin and nature. And this knowledge, the Hermetic tradition believed, once activated, is irreversible. Once you know, not intellectually, but in the chest, in the pulse, in the specific ache behind the sternum that certain questions produce, you cannot unknow it. The sphragis does not begin operating when you learn about it. It has always been operating. What happens when you encounter this material is not activation, it is acknowledgement. The seal was already there. You are simply seeing it for what it is. Let me tell you about the Nag Hammadi texts now, because the Corpus Hermeticum does not stand alone. It is part of a tradition that was buried, literally buried, sealed in clay, hidden underground for 16 centuries. Not because it was considered wrong by the people who hid it, but because the institutional church had decided it was dangerous. The Gospel of Thomas, found in the Nag Hammadi library, opens with the words, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded. And he said, whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Not whoever believes, whoever discovers, whoever does the work of recognition." Saying 22, when you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, then you will enter the kingdom. Read through the lens of the Corpus Hermeticum's account of the descent, the coating of the pneuma at each sphere, the acquisition of the masculine and feminine polarities, the upper and lower. This saying becomes technical instruction. It is describing the reversal of the descent, the shedding of the coatings, the return to the undivided pneuma. The sphragis is the document that says you are capable of making this return, not in a metaphysical future, not after death, in this life, in this body, in this specific wrist with its specific branching veins. The tradition called the person who undertook this work a teleos, a completed one, though the Greek carries none of the English connotations of superiority. Teleos means arrived at its telos, its purpose, a seed that has become the plant it always was. Ficino, in his commentary written in 1469, described it this way: the pneumatic who has not yet remembered is like a man holding a letter he has not yet opened. He knows it is addressed to him. He feels its weight at every moment, but he has not broken the seal. The pneumatic who has remembered is the same man, having read the letter, different not in body or circumstance, but in knowing what he is carrying. The sphragis is a seal on information. The pneumatic work is the opening of that seal. This is why the Corpus Hermeticum calls the wrist mark, the specific, individual, unrepeatable pattern pressed into the skin at birth, the seal of the returning soul, not because there is a literal mystical inscription there, but because the wrist is where the pulse is closest to the surface, where the living frequency of the pneuma, wrapped in its 7 coatings, beats closest to the visible world, where the animal rhythm of the material body and the original vibration of the nous come into direct proximity. When you press your finger there, you are pressing against the most direct interface between what you are in this lifetime and what you are beyond it. Let me tell you what the Hermetic tradition says about the 7 coatings in reverse, because the ascent is described with as much specificity as the descent, and it is the description of the ascent that explains what the pneumatic experience actually is in practical terms. The ascent begins, not with the death of the body in the Hermetic system, but with the first genuine act of gnosis, the first recognition that is not intellectual but visceral, the first moment of knowing rather than believing. At that moment, the text says, the coating of the moon begins to loosen. The identification with the body's rhythms, the conviction that the animal self is the complete self, thins without disappearing. There is suddenly a self that watches the body without being entirely identical to it. As the work continues, The mercury coating loosens, the identification with the narrative self, the story constructed from memory and social reflection. This is frequently experienced as disorienting. The pneumatic person undergoing this phase often describes their own biography as feeling like a description of someone else, a character they have been playing. The Venus coating follows, the conviction that desire, when satisfied, will produce the completion the self is searching for. What remains is wanting without the belief that the wanting can be resolved by any material object. The solar coating, the investment in being seen and recognized, loosens next. When this happens, the pneumatic person often becomes, paradoxically, both more effective in the world and less concerned with its rewards. Then the Mars coating, the compulsive forward motion, the drive to compete and define the self against others. What remains is action without the need to prove. The Jupiter coating, the internal authority that must judge, must evaluate, must rank, releases into awareness without the need to decree. And finally, deepest, last, the Saturn coating, the experience of time as weight, the relationship with delay, with waiting, with the knowledge that everything ends. This is the most resistant coating because it is the one most deeply woven into the structure of material existence. What the Corpus Hermeticum says awaits on the other side of the seven, the pneuma returned to itself, shedding the coatings without losing the wisdom they carried, is not described in detail. The texts become, at that point, nearly silent. Tractate 13, the Discourse on Rebirth, says only this: I am no longer speaking the same language, I am speaking in fire, which is perhaps the only honest thing to say about an experience that language was not built to contain. Now I want to tell you about something that the modern recovery of the Hermetic tradition has frequently gotten wrong, because getting it wrong leads people away from the recognition the tradition describes rather than toward it. The sphragis has been adopted by dozens of modern esoteric movements as a mark of special election. You have the seal, they say. You were chosen. You are different from the masses. You are light. They are dark. The Corpus Hermeticum says nothing of the kind. The Hermetic tradition does identify pneumatic consciousness as a real phenomenon. It does describe it as the capacity, not the guaranteed destiny, the capacity for ascent, but it consistently insists on the relationship between pneumatic awareness and humility, not performed humility. The structural humility that comes from recognizing that the sphragis is not an achievement. It is a responsibility. Tractate 9 says, the good man differs from the pneumatic only in this, that the pneumatic knows he is pneumatic. The knowledge does not make him more. It makes him more accountable, more accountable. If you carry the sphragis, you are accountable for what you do with that recognition. In the sense that a person who understands the mechanism of a fire is accountable, in a way that someone who has never thought about combustion is not, for whether the fire spreads or illuminates. The pneumatic awareness is the capacity to become what the texts call a therapon theou, a servant of God, a tending one, someone who tends the divine fire in matter the way a temple priest tended a sacred flame. Not because they are required to, because they see what the flame is and cannot pretend not to. Look at your wrist again. The pulse is still there. The branching veins, unique to you, unrepeatable in all of history. The skin that is both the outermost edge of what you are in this lifetime and the surface under which the original vibration of your pneuma beats at its constant ancient frequency. The Corpus Hermeticum, written in Alexandria somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries, translated in Florence in 1463 by a man working against the deadline of a dying patron, buried in a clay jar in the Egyptian desert by someone who understood that this knowledge was worth hiding rather than destroying. This text looks at that wrist and says, "You are not here by accident. You are not here for the first time. The pattern of your return is encoded in your descent. The 7 coatings you wear are not imprisonment, they are curriculum, and the seal they press against the material world is your proof of origin and your notice of eventual departure, not departure through death, through recognition. The pneumatic who remembers what they are does not wait for the body to stop in order to begin the ascent. The ascent in the Hermetic system is available now. It is happening now in the fact that you are watching this. In the fact that the word sphragis feels, in some part of you that is not the reading mind, like a word you have heard before. In the fact that the description of the xenia, the foreignness, the homesickness for somewhere you have never physically been, does not produce in you the puzzlement it would produce in someone for whom it was entirely new information. For the pneumatic person, the Hermetic tradition is not theology, it is mirror, and what the mirror shows is not what the world told you you were. It shows the returning one, the sealed one, the one who came down through 7 spheres to this specific body, this specific lifetime, this specific set of questions, and who carries, pressed into the pulse point of the right wrist, the mark that says, I was sent, I am here, I know the way back. If you want to go deeper into this, if you want the complete architecture of the Hermetic descent and ascent, the specific practices the tradition prescribed for recognizing the sphragis in daily experience, and the framework for beginning the work, the texts call anabasis, the return. The pneumatic code is built specifically for this work. It is a complete guide for the pneumatic person who is ready to stop encountering this material and start working with it. The link is in the first pinned comment. It is only available while this video is running. When it ends, the link closes. If this is the moment, click now. The tradition does not promise easy. The ascent requires what the text calls continuous attention, a continuous redirecting of awareness, remembering what is coding and what is core. But the pneumatic person who has glimpsed the sphragis even once cannot unsee it. The moment of recognition is a permanent alteration. Once the nous has turned toward itself, the direction is set. The Corpus Hermeticum ends its first tractate, the Poimandres, with a scene of the pneumatic student returning to the world after the vision. He walks among human beings who are still asleep, still identified with their codings, still believing the surface is the depth, and he weeps for them, not with pity, with love, because he recognizes in them the same sealed pneuma he carries, and he knows that the seal in every one of them is unbroken, waiting. The text says, I began to preach to men the beauty of reverence and knowledge, people, earthborn folk, you who have surrendered yourselves to drunkenness and sleep and ignorance of God, be sober now, cease from your surfeit, cease to be put to sleep by irrational sleep, not evil, not condemned, sleeping. And the pneumatic tradition does not shake the sleeper with judgment. It speaks into the sleep and trusts that the sphragis, still present, still beating, still pressing against the inside of the right wrist, will eventually resonate at the right frequency to open. You are not asleep. You are looking at your wrist. You are feeling the pulse. You are sitting with the knowledge that the pattern pressed into your skin belongs to no one else who has ever lived or will ever live, and that the tradition looking at that pattern from across 2,000 years sees in it exactly what it always described: the seal, the mark, the evidence of origin, the promise of return, the returning soul, still here, still awake, still carrying the frequency of the pleroma in the pulse point of a body that will one day be shed like the 7th coding it has always been. The address on the letter was never lost. It was on your wrist the whole time. If you want to take the next step, if you want the complete map of the pneumatic ascent from the Hermetic tradition alongside the practical framework for doing this work in daily life, the pneumatic code is waiting. Comment the word pneuma below this video, or click the link in the first pinned comment, only available while this video is running. The work begins exactly where you are.